No one in the restaurant screamed when it happened. Not at first. The music was still playing softly through the speakers. Forks scraped against plates. Glasses clinked. Conversations overlapped in the familiar rhythm of a busy night. Then, the sound was sharp, heavy, wrong. A young waitress's head was slammed against the edge of the table. For half a second, nobody understood what they had just witnessed. Some people thought a tray had fallen. Others assumed it was an accident. But when her body froze and her hands trembled against the wood, the truth settled over the room like a wave of ice. The man who did it didn't panic. He didn't look afraid. He stood tall in his tailored jacket, expensive watch catching the light, his face twisted in irritation rather than regret. He was young, wealthy, confident, the kind of man who had never been told no and never expected consequences. A few diners gasped. Someone whispered, "Did he just?" The waitress didn't cry out. Her breath came fast and shallow as she tried to steady herself, eyes unfocused, fingers gripping the table for balance. And just a few steps away, near the back of the restaurant, a man slowly lifted his head. He had been sitting quietly, almost unnoticed. No spotlight, no attention, no one watching him. At his feet lay a large, disciplined K9, perfectly still, trained not to move unless commanded. The man's posture changed, subtly, almost invisibly, not anger, calculation. Because what no one in that restaurant realized was that they were sitting near someone who had spent decades learning to read danger before it exploded. A former Navy SEAL, a trained K9 handler, a man whose entire life had been built around control. Steven Seagal. The rich young man laughed, shaking his head as if the moment amused him. "Don't just stand there," he snapped at the waitress. "Do your job." Her knees buckled slightly. Still, no one moved. Fear has a strange effect on crowds. Everyone waits for someone else to act. Steven's eyes shifted from the waitress to the man's hands, to the distance between them. 10 feet. Close enough. The K9 sensed it too. Its ears lifted slightly, body tense but obedient. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand yet. He simply watched, calm, focused, measuring every movement in the room. Because moments like this don't begin with chaos. They begin with silence. And the man who had just slammed a waitress's head into a table had no idea that his next decision, whatever it would be, was about to change the entire night. Just minutes earlier, everything inside the restaurant had felt ordinary. Warm yellow lights hung above polished wooden tables. Soft music drifted through the air, mixing with the low hum of conversation and laughter. The scent of grilled food and fresh bread filled the room, comforting and familiar. It was the kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Servers moved quickly between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease. Couples leaned toward each other in quiet conversation. A group near the windows toasted drinks, celebrating something no one else needed to know about. Near the back wall, partially hidden from the center of the room, Steven sat alone at a small table. He wore plain clothes, nothing that suggested fame or status. No one approached him. No one stared. To the restaurant, he was just another customer enjoying a quiet meal. At his feet lay his K9 partner, calm and motionless, trained to ignore noise, people, and distraction. The dog's breathing was slow, steady, almost invisible unless someone looked closely. Steven preferred places like this, anonymous, predictable, calm. He had chosen the seat intentionally, back against the wall, clear view of the room, exits within sight. Old habits never truly fade. Across the restaurant sat a table that drew attention for entirely different reasons. A group of young professionals crowded together, voices loud, laughter careless. Their clothes were expensive, their confidence obvious. Credit cards rested openly on the table beside half-empty glasses. At the center of them sat the rich young man. He spoke the most, laughed the loudest, snapped his fingers when service felt slow. The others leaned in when he talked, feeding off his energy. When the waitress first approached their table, she did so politely, offering a nervous smile as she took their order. At first, nothing seemed wrong. She repeated the items carefully, apologized when he interrupted her mid-sentence, nodded when he corrected her pronunciation. Small things, the kinds of moments most people wouldn't notice. But Steven did. He noticed how her shoulders tightened when the man sighed loudly, how she clasped her hands together after stepping away, how she hesitated before returning with their drinks. Moments like this often go unseen. Not because people don't care, but because they don't expect trouble to grow from something so small. The waitress returned to the table with the order. One item was delayed. Not missing, not forgotten, just delayed. The man's smile vanished instantly. He leaned back in his chair, irritation flashing across his face. "Are you serious?" he said. She apologized immediately, explaining the kitchen was busy. He rolled his eyes. Steven watched from across the room as the waitress nodded repeatedly, absorbing the frustration directed at her. She kept her voice calm, professional, respectful. Around them, the restaurant continued as normal music played. Laughter rose and fell. Forks clinked. No one realized how close the atmosphere was to breaking. Under Steven's table, the canine lifted its head slightly. Just for a moment. Animals notice tension long before humans admit it exists. Steven's gaze shifted toward the young man's table. Nothing had happened yet, but something was beginning. The change in the man's behavior was sudden. His tone sharpened, losing the playful edge it had carried moments earlier. What began as impatience turned into mockery. Quick comments at first, then longer remarks meant to sting. The waitress tried to remain professional. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. "The kitchen is just... Do you always talk this slow?" He interrupted, smirking. "Or is tonight special?" A few people at nearby tables glanced over. The waitress forced a small smile and nodded, gripping the order pad a little tighter. The man's friends laughed. Not because the joke was funny, but because laughing was easier than challenging him. Another comment followed, then another, each one louder, each one more personal. He criticized her job, her intelligence, the way she spoke, every word carefully chosen to humiliate rather than complain. Some diners frowned. Others looked down at their plates. No one spoke. The waitress's cheeks flushed. Her eyes dropped briefly to the floor before she lifted them again, trying to keep control of her voice. "I'll check on your order," she said. As she turned away, the man scoffed loudly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "People like this shouldn't even be working here." That was when the room began to feel different, not loud, heavy. The waitress stopped walking. She turned back, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. Before she could speak, the man stood up from his chair. His sudden movement drew attention from across the restaurant. Chairs scraped lightly. Conversation slowed. Steven's eyes lifted immediately. The canine's body stiffened beneath the table. The man leaned forward, close enough that the waitress had to step back. "Hey," he said, pointing at her chest. "I'm talking to you." She raised her hands slightly. "Sir, please." He grabbed her wrist. Gasps rippled through the room. She tried to pull away, shock flashing across her face. "Let go," she said quietly. Instead, his grip tightened. For a moment, it looked as if someone might intervene, but no one did. Fear has a way of freezing good people in place. Then, in a burst of anger, the man shoved her forward. Her head struck the edge of the table with a sickening thud. The sound cut through the restaurant like glass shattering. Everything stopped. The music felt too loud. The lights too bright. The waitress collapsed against the table, stunned, breath caught in her throat. A glass tipped over and shattered at her feet. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice said, "Did that really just happen?" The man straightened his jacket, barely reacting. "Watch where you're standing." He snapped as if she were the problem. That was the moment Steven pushed his chair back. Slowly, deliberately, no rush, no panic, just movement. He stood, placing himself between the waitress and the man without touching either of them. The canine remained still, waiting. Steven's voice was calm, low and unmistakably firm. "That's enough," he said. The man laughed. "And who are you supposed to be?" Steven met his eyes. "Someone telling you to step back? Have you ever watched someone cross a line in public?" Steven didn't move right away. He stood between the waitress and the man, his body angled slightly, not aggressive, not defensive, simply positioned to block further harm. Behind him, the waitress struggled to steady her breathing. Her hands trembled as she pressed her palm against the table for balance. Steven glanced back briefly. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She swallowed and nodded. "I think so." He shifted one step to the side, allowing her space while keeping himself between her and the man. The restaurant remained silent. Dozens of eyes were fixed on the scene, yet no one spoke. No one seemed certain what to do next. Steven could feel the familiar pull inside him, instinct urging speed, force, finality. He knew exactly how quickly he could end this. Years of training, discipline, and repetition had carved those reactions deep into muscle memory. In another place, another life, this situation would already be over. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a crowded restaurant filled with civilians, glass tables, sharp edges, panic waiting to spread. Power without control here would only create more victims. Steven inhaled slowly, grounding himself. He reached down briefly, 2 fingers lowering toward the canine. "Stay." The dog remained perfectly still, eyes alert but obedient. Steven turned his attention back to the man. You need to sit down, he said calmly. The man scoffed, stepping closer. Or what? He replied. You going to lecture me too? Steven didn't raise his voice. You're angry, he said evenly. But you don't get to take that out on her. The man shook his head in disbelief, laughing under his breath. You think you can tell me what to do? Steven met his gaze without blinking. I'm telling you what happens next, he replied. Behind them, someone quietly pulled out a phone. Another person followed. The air buzzed with nervous tension. The waitress shifted behind Steven, unsure where to stand. He glanced back again and spoke softly without turning his head. Move behind me, he said. She did. Steven planted his feet, not in a fighting stance, in a protective one. For a moment, the man hesitated. Doubt flickered across his expression, just long enough to reveal uncertainty. Then pride rushed in to cover it. He puffed his chest and jabbed a finger forward. You don't know who I am, he said. I could make one call and end your life. Steven remained unmoved. I don't care who you are, he answered. I care what you just did. The K9's ears lifted slightly, sensing the tension climbing. Steven felt the shift instantly. The man's breathing changed. His shoulders tightened. His hands flexed. Steven recognized the signs, the exact moment when anger tips into action. He raised one hand, palm outward. This ends now, he said. Sit down. Keep your hands where I can see them. The police are on their way. The man laughed again, but it sounded forced. You really think they'll side with her? He sneered. With you. Steven's voice remained steady. They'll side with the truth. For several long seconds, no one moved. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Steven knew the next decision wouldn't be his. It would be the man's. And whatever choice he made in the next few seconds would determine how this night ended. For a brief moment, it seemed like the man might actually listen. His eyes darted around the room. Phones were raised now. Faces stared openly. The attention he usually commanded suddenly felt different, heavier, judgmental. Then his jaw tightened. Embarrassment twisted into anger. He laughed sharply. You think you scare me? He took a step closer, invading Steven's space. The smell of alcohol lingered on his breath. Steven didn't move, didn't lean back, didn't flinch. I'm giving you a chance, Steven said calmly. Step away. Apologize and this ends. The man tilted his head, mocking him. Apologize, he repeated to her. He gestured dismissively toward the waitress behind Steven. For a moment, doubt crossed his face again. The quiet realization that something about this situation wasn't going the way he expected. Then pride crushed it. He shoved Steven's shoulder hard. Gasps echoed across the restaurant. A woman near the window covered her mouth. Someone muttered, "Oh no." Steven took one controlled step backward. Not from fear, to place himself fully between the man and the waitress. The K9 rose to its feet instantly. The room froze. Steven raised two fingers slightly down. The dog obeyed at once, muscles tense but restrained. That moment alone silenced the crowd. The man smirked nervously. That's what I thought, he said, trying to laugh it off, but no one else was laughing. Steven looked directly into his eyes. You still have time, he said quietly. The man's smile faded. He lifted his hand again, and that was the moment everything changed. Steven moved, not fast, not violent, not dramatic, precise. He redirected the man's arm with a simple turn of the wrist, stepping to the side as he shifted his balance. The motion was smooth, practiced, almost effortless. The man stumbled forward, crashing into a chair as it scraped loudly across the floor. The entire restaurant flinched. Steven didn't strike him, didn't chase him. He simply positioned himself so the man couldn't regain control. The man scrambled to his feet, shock written across his face. What the? He shouted. Steven's voice remained level. Stay where you are. The man hesitated, breathing hard, suddenly unsure. He had expected shouting. A fight, chaos instead. He found himself facing someone completely unmoved by his anger. Around them, people whispered. Did you see that? He barely touched him. How did he do that? Steven didn't explain. He didn't posture. He stood still, hands open, eyes focused, fully in command of the space between them. The man glanced at the K9 again. Its stare never wavered. For the first time that night, fear crept into his expression. Not fear of violence, fear of losing control. Steven spoke again, slow and deliberate. You don't need to be hurt to be stopped, he said. You just need to stop. The words hung in the air. The man's hands trembled. His voice dropped. You think you're some kind of hero? Steven shook his head once. No, he said. I'm someone making sure she goes home safe. The room remained silent. Everyone could feel it. The confrontation was no longer about strength. It was about restraint. And the man standing in front of Steven was quickly realizing he no longer had either. At this moment, if you were watching this happen, the man's smirk wavered, trying to maintain the bravado that had carried him this far. "You think this changes anything?" he said, voice trembling just slightly. But no one was laughing. Not a single person in the restaurant. The chatter had died. Phones were still raised. Eyes stayed glued to the unfolding scene. Steven remained calm, every muscle relaxed, yet every movement precise. His presence alone shifted the energy in the room. Control radiated from him in a way that left no room for miscalculation. "You still have time," he said quietly, evenly, but with an authority that brooked no argument. "Sit down. Stay calm. Walk away. The police are on their way." The man's confidence faltered. For the first time, he hesitated. His hand, raised instinctively in defiance, wavered midair. He blinked rapidly, attempting to regain composure, trying to hide the fear beginning to rise inside him. Then, ignoring Steven's warning, he raised his hand again. And in a single smooth motion, no yelling, no chaos, no unnecessary force, Steven acted. He moved with absolute precision. His body shifted, redirecting the man's raised arm effortlessly, just enough to break the attacker's balance. Just enough to stop him without causing real harm. It was a controlled action, a demonstration of skill rather than aggression. The man stumbled backward. His footing lost, he crashed into a chair, scraping across the floor. Panic flashed in his eyes as he struggled to regain stability. His friends froze, uncertain whether to intervene or flee. The canine remained calm at Steven's side, obediently watching the man's movements, muscles tense but restrained. The entire restaurant went silent. The noise of the earlier confrontation, glasses clinking, conversations murmuring, vanished entirely. Every eye was fixed on the scene, fully aware of the authority Steven wielded without raising his voice or striking a single blow. Steven didn't pursue him, didn't threaten him. He simply stood firm, steady, in control. Hands relaxed, eyes locked on the man, his calm demeanor radiating the message clearly. "You don't need to be hurt to be stopped. You just need to be out of control." The words sank in. Slowly, the young man realized the precariousness of his position. All his bluster, all his attempts at dominance, had evaporated under the quiet command of discipline. Around them, people shifted slightly, some exhaling softly. Relief mixed with awe. Witnessing restraint wielded with such authority was rare. The room felt the weight of a lesson that needed no explanation. Even the man's friends stepped back, their expressions shifting from amusement to concern. The arrogance of the group had vanished. They recognized the consequences of acting without control, even in a public space. Steven lowered his gaze briefly to check on the waitress. She was behind him, safe. Her knees bent slightly, hands gripping the edge of the table. Her eyes met his, gratitude clear without a word. No chaos had erupted. No violence had escalated beyond what was necessary to assert control. The attack had been halted with precision, professionalism, and unwavering calm. This was the moment the entire restaurant would remember, not for the action itself, but for the way control completely dismantled aggression. It wasn't about strength, anger, or loudness. It was about discipline, timing, and authority wielded without malice. Within minutes, security and police arrived. The young man's friends pulled him back, their confidence replaced by quiet unease. He had expected chaos, confrontation, or intimidation to protect him. Instead, he found himself stripped of control in front of a room full of witnesses. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The restaurant remained tense, but in that tension was clarity. People had witnessed something rare: authority without aggression, power without violence. They had seen restraint in its purest form. The waitress, still trembling slightly, adjusted her apron and stepped forward. Steven gave her a small nod, checking to make sure she was steady. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded again. Words weren't necessary. Her relief, the subtle exhale she had been holding in, spoke volumes. She was safe, protected, and for the first time in those chaotic moments she could breathe freely. The young man sat silently, his arrogance replaced with quiet regret. His friends avoided eye contact. The lesson had been made clear without a single punch thrown. Actions had consequences, even for the wealthy and entitled. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Not because of a fight, not because of bloodshed, not because of dramatic chaos, because of what didn't happen. People didn't share it for shock. They shared it for the lesson, for the demonstration that true strength is measured not by loudness, force, or rage, but by control, discipline, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. News outlets, social media feeds, and personal messages carried the footage. Millions watched, replayed, and shared. The conversation wasn't about celebrity. It wasn't about fame. It was about a quiet man, a trained K9, and the restraint that prevented unnecessary harm. The waitress eventually returned to work, her confidence restored. The young man faced consequences, legal and personal, that his wealth could not erase. Authority and accountability do not bend to privilege. They are universal. Steven did not stay for interviews, did not post online, did not seek recognition. He simply walked away as quietly as he had arrived. The K9 followed closely, obedient and calm. Unaware of the viral ripple their calm restraint had set in motion. It was a reminder to everyone who had witnessed it, and everyone who would watch later, that the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, not the one who shouts, shoves, or threatens. The strongest person is the one who protects without losing control, who acts decisively when necessary, and who teaches lessons that live long after the moment passes. Final engagement. If you believe real power means protecting the vulnerable, not dominating them, type respite in the comments. And tell us, which moment hit you the hardest in this story? There are more stories like this coming soon. Watch closely, pay attention, and let us know which parts resonated most so we can bring you even better content next time. Because true lessons aren't measured by fights. They're measured by discipline, restraint, and the courage to do what's right when no one else will.